My name is Allan Hyndman. I was pastor of a Free Methodist church in Hamilton, Ontario in 1985 when I met the first Cambodian I ever met in my life. He was a teenage boy. He came with a university friend on a Sunday night because the university friend wanted to introduce this Cambodian friend of his to church. He had just come to the city. The result over the coming months was that eventually there were 19 Cambodian people, all of them refugees recently arrived from Thailand, sponsored by the Canadian government, living in Hamilton. They were coming to our church. Well, I didn't know how to communicate with Cambodians who couldn't understand English very well, and some of them not at all. And they couldn't understand me and us, of course, but the people of the church loved them, cared for them, took them to learn the things they needed to learn in a new culture, and so they kept coming because they found friends there. But what went on in church was not really of great interest to them. At least I think that's what the trouble was, because while I was preaching, the 19 of them would be talking out loud to each other while I was trying to preach, and I didn't know if they were interpreting to each other or just bored. But what I knew was I was really not communicating with them. On a Tuesday night, we were meeting for prayer in the home of a retired minister, and I asked at that prayer meeting that they pray with me that God would give us somebody in the city of Hamilton who could speak the Khmer language and knew something about the Khmer culture, who could help us communicate with these people. We loved them, but we didn't know how to communicate with them, and we knew we were not really reaching them. That was Tuesday night. On Wednesday, a Cambodian refugee family on their way from Thailand to Edmonton, Alberta, got off the plane in Toronto for a change of planes, and while they were off the plane, an announcement was made that everyone going to Hamilton should get in a certain line and get on a certain vehicle to go to Hamilton. They got into that line thinking that the announcement was for Edmonton. So they got in line, went with the rest of the people to Hamilton, got off the little bus they were on, and were ushered to a motel room. And this was Wednesday, the day following our prayer meeting. Well, on Wednesday, they began to realize that no one was there to meet them, and there was something wrong with the plan, because they expected to meet their sponsors, some church people in Edmonton, Alberta, that were expecting them. So Sok began to ask, "Where is this place?" And they said, "Hamilton." And he said, "This is not Edmonton?" They laughed and said, "No, this is not Edmonton." And he said, "Well, how far is Edmonton?" And they said, "Oh, maybe 3,000 miles. And he was frustrated because he was in the wrong city, apparently. So he began to pray and ask God to lead him to some Christian family who could help him to figure out what to do when he was so far from his destination. Now, that was Wednesday. That same Wednesday, a young man from our congregation who had been attending our services went to the motel where the new refugees were commonly lodged, and just checked out to see who was there, if there was anyone he knew. I got a phone call from Savandi, the young man, saying, "Pastor, you need to come down here. The Lord has sent us a pastor." And I thought, well, okay, I'll come and meet who you've met, but how am I going to know if this person is a pastor? So I went down to the motel, praying as I went, "Lord, help me to know how to understand and what to think of who I'm going to meet." I met Sok and Sok Em and their family. They came to Canada, trained as pastors, evangelical pastors at that, and trained as a pastor, I should say, for Sok was a pastor, and his wife and their 3 children. And I hadn't been there at the motel for more than 5 minutes when Sok showed me what he had with him. He had suitcases full of hymn books and Khmer Bibles, and he had with him his notes of the courses he had taken in a refugee Bible camp where he had been trained in pastoral theology and the study of the Bible and so on, I looked at his notes, which were in English and Khmer, and I realized immediately this man really knows God. God had sent him to Hamilton by accident? Well, not really by accident, by providence. We communicated with the people in Edmonton and they released them to stay in Hamilton, and a marvelous relationship began in 1985 that continues to this day. This is 2010. And it was in 1992 that the Cambodian government first opened the country to allow refugees to come back and visit their relatives. Among the earliest of those who went to visit their relatives was Sok, who went to his home village, and on his very first trip was enabled by the providence of God to lead 3 families to the Lord. Is that 3 families at least, perhaps even more than that, but there were several families who gave their hearts to the Lord the very first time they heard. Soon after that, Sok went back to Cambodia as a church planter, planted 7 new churches in that immediate area where there had been no Christian witness previously, and there started a Bible training program for pastors. Well, years have passed, and for a period of time he came back to Canada and pastored a Cambodian congregation in Hamilton and in Toronto. And then by 2006, there were many, many, many Cambodian people turning to Christ because of the work of God in their lives after the terrible revolution of the 70s. So many people were turning to Christ that there was not enough pastors, not enough Christian leaders to lead them, and an appeal came from some of the Christian leaders who knew Sok and knew of his experience and his ability to teach and his passion for training pastors, that they would be well equipped, asked him to come back and start a Bible training program for pastors, which he did in 2006. That has become Tahas Bible Institute, which is thriving in the Kampong Chhnang province even up to today. And so over these 25 years, Sok and Savi M and my wife and I and their family and our family have become knit together like brothers and sisters. We love one another deeply, work together on many things, and I thank the Lord for the privilege of being a part of what He's doing in Cambodia.